Hi, welcome to Chapter 2. In this chapter, we're going to be talking about individualized special education programs, and this is where we're going to talk about planning and delivering services. Let's get started. We talked about in Chapter 1 that students with disabilities are accessing the general curriculum at a higher rate than ever, and many approaches are available to support students as they access this general curriculum. First one is universal design for learning. A second approach is the use of assistive technology. Third is differentiated instruction. And the fourth is systematic application of increasingly intensive supports. Here's a direct instruction video from Mesquite Elementary, and it talks about the universal design principles. Hopefully it will help better explain these concepts.
In many classrooms, the focus is on an illusory average student. Many curricula are designed for that student. Cognitive neuroscience has shown us that there really isn't an average student anywhere, and that's why it's an illusory student. Universal design for learning, though, is particularly focused on making sure that we get those students who have been marginalized, for whom that designing for the average student has never worked well. And that certainly means students who have been struggling, students for whom English is not their first language, students with disabilities. They've been typically marginalized by this illusory average curriculum. Secondly, though, students at the other margins, the students who are called gifted and talented, are also students who have been underserved by this mainstream curriculum. They haven't been challenged. They're bored. They're underserved as well. UDL is a framework based in cognitive neurosciences for designing learning experiences that work across a wide spectrum of learners. Its main purpose is to make sure that everybody is a successful learner and reaches what we call being an expert learner. That is, they know a lot, they know how to do a lot, and they love learning and want to do it more. The key to universal design for learning is that we're designing learning experiences which from the beginning are designed to be universal and to make sure everybody learns. And that design is primarily based on the power to be very flexible in allowing choices, in allowing different paths, in allowing for things to be presented in different ways so that we reach those other two things, universal and everybody learns. The three principles of universal design for learning come from careful analysis of what learning really is, and particularly the research that has been done by thousands of other researchers in cognitive science, cognitive neuroscience, neuropsychology, which have carefully looked at what comprises learning, how does learning really work, and what are its differences among individual learners. From that work, we've abstracted out three simple principles that are involved in any learning situation. How does the learner pick up information? How do they express and act on that information? And how are they engaged by the learning situation? There are three broad principles. The first has to do with how we present information to the learner. And we talk about multiple means of representation. As it turns out, there's no one way that we can present information so to be successful for everyone to learn it. So we talk about multiple means of representation. So in UDL, we talk about providing multiple representations so that we're sure everyone will be able to make sense of the symbols, the language, the drawings, and so on. Take, for example, in teaching mathematics, it's typically very strong to use multiple representations, not just the symbolic expression of the numbers, but manipulables, things that the children can operate on and see directly and perceptually rather than their symbolic form. So that's a great example of providing multiple representation, both the symbolic number and a physical manipulative. The second principle is provide multiple means of action and expression. And that takes into account the fact that students vary greatly in how they express what they know, how they can act skillfully, how they can communicate in language or in drawing and so on. And students differ widely, so we say we must provide multiple means of expression over the course of our teaching and learning. The third principle is multiple means of engagement. And in many ways, it's the most important principle. If we don't engage students in learning, don't make it important to them, make them motivated for it, then none of the other forms of representation and expression will be that important. Within Universal Design for Learning, when we look at a curriculum, we think of 4 main components, and each of them need to be universally designed. The first component is, what are its goals? How do we translate standards into things that are important to do in the classroom? Secondly, what are the materials that are going to be in that classroom? Everything from a chalkboard to a textbook to a workbook to something on the wall. Are these materials key to learning? And if so, are they universally designed for learning? Third, the methods. How does the teacher go about teaching when she or he is working at helping students learn? Does she set up collaborative groups? Does she lecture? Does she provide experiences out in the world? And lastly, and very important to Universal Design for Learning, is the means of assessment. How are we sure that learning really occurs? When we began our work, we, like most people, were focused on learners who were doing poorly, who looked like they had disabilities. Over time, we began to change our focus because we could see when we were in classrooms that the classrooms were in fact disabling, that they were not designed properly to ensure that every child would succeed. And we began more and more to see that the curriculum itself was disabled, and that the work of the Universal Design for Learning guidelines is to reduce the disabilities in the curriculum itself so that more students succeed, more students have optimum challenges, and come out as expert learners in the end.
I hope that video helped explain Universal Design for Learning, but let's just make sure you understand it and review it for your Module 1 exam. Universal Design is a way to help all students approach the general curriculum in non-standard ways. The key features: it creates alternatives open to all students. It's part of the standard delivery of instruction, and it includes multiple and flexible options for student participation. And technology is often at the heart of Universal Design. We talked about electronic books or enlarged print. This could also be books on tape. This could also have student or peer tutoring. All of these can help provide a better education for all students in your classroom. When it comes to differentiated instruction, this approach will allow all students to learn the same content, but with different methods applied to match the different learning needs. So you're going to approach your lesson in multiple modalities, making sure your lesson is accomplished. And you can do this in 4 ways. With your instructional activities, provide different types of instruction to small groups. When it comes to content, you can chunk lessons into smaller, more deliverable pieces of information. When it comes to instructional delivery, you could use flexible groupings, provide different pacings for student groups that need it. And when it comes to instructional materials, you could provide fewer practice items, meaning rather than giving a student 20 practice items at a time, you provide them maybe 4 or 5 and check their progress along the way. You could provide students graphic organizers, which I'll talk more about in future chapters. And especially when you're teaching math, the use of manipulatives can be extremely powerful. When it comes to providing services for students with disabilities in your classroom, there are 2 ways you can accommodate them. One is through accommodations, the other one is through modifications, and I want to make sure you know the difference. Accommodations, this is what most students with disabilities require as they complete assignments or tests. These include simple changes to the elements of your test, such as maybe enlarged text, maybe using a word processor, having an interpreter, maybe having extended time for a test or taking it in a different setting. Accommodations do not change the outcome or expectation you have in your classroom. The second level is a modification. This is a little bit different. This is used when accommodations are insufficient. This could be having an assignment or test reduced or altered. Modifications change or alter the standard for learning. An example would be if you had a 8-page paper required for students at the 9th grade level, an accommodation might be you provide the student with an additional week to complete the assignment. They still have to do that 8-page paper, but they're going to get an extra week, maybe to help organize, to help complete the task. A modification would be to cut that assignment maybe to a 3-page paper. The standards are completely different. Modifications are not allowed at the college level, but we do a fantastic job at providing accommodations on the University of Akron's campus. Check out the Office of Accessibility if you ever want to see what I'm talking about. As far as models for inclusive special education, trust me when I say inclusion has many different meanings depending on the school you're in, depending on the classroom you're in. IDEA 2004 reinforces the idea that a continuum of services is needed. That means there might be students that it would be appropriate for them to receive their education in a separate environment or even a separate school. But that goes all the way through the general education option. You take the least restrictive environment first and then identify where instruction would be the most appropriate. These could include pull-in programs, co-teaching, maybe bringing in a consulting teacher, and finding collaboration amongst service professionals. Remember, we're looking for a balance of a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. Make sure you understand that theme as we go along the rest of the semester. A lot of my students ask, what's a highly qualified special educator? Well, No Child Left Behind requires all teachers to be highly qualified. IDEA summarizes and includes the same requirements as No Child Left Behind. These requirements were more complex than initially thought, and they're constantly being analyzed by school systems. Remember, IDEA and No Child Left Behind, these are laws from 2002 and 2004. They're usually reauthorized every 7 years. You can expect a reauthorization very, very soon. Due to this issue, however, there's been an increase in co-teaching and in collaboration to meet this highly qualified issue. Check it out in your text. When it comes to the IEP process, every infant, toddler, and student who's identified as having a disability must have an individualized program. The purposes of these programs is to ensure that each of these individuals receives a free and appropriate public education, is provided an education in the least restrictive environment. This plan is specific to the individual student, and that student is provided services with the expectation of outstanding results. When it comes to the IEP, you're going to hear this term a lot. In general, IEPs are roadmaps to create that help guide instruction and the delivery of services. So they are a roadmap. They're not the curriculum, but they're a prescription of what the student needs in order to be successful. They focus on the student's strengths and individual needs, and parents and education professionals must agree on these plans for the delivery of services before they take place. The steps in the IEP process are as follows, and they'd be really good for you to know for the Module 1 exam. It starts with a pre-referral, goes on to the referral process. We start looking at identification through testing to determine if they are eligible under the services provided under IDEA. If they are, then the IEP is developed by a team. The implementation of the IEP is conducted, and then we evaluate and review the student's progress as the implementation is taking place. Look at this process in your text to get a better understanding. When it comes to the IEP team, you're going to be an integral part of it, whether you are a general educator or special educator. IDEA specifies who must be a part of this team. There must be at least one general educator. There must be at least one special educator or related service provider, a representative of the school district like a principal or a special education coordinator, someone there who can interpret the results. That technically could be a school psychologist, or it could be the special educator if they are knowledgeable. The parent must be present, and the student if it's appropriate. Remember, anybody can attend this meeting, but parents dictate who is going to ultimately be present there. Parents can invite and bring whoever they want. Teachers and service providers must ask parents' permission for outside members to attend. Here's a video that looks at the IEP team process and might spell it out a little bit better for you. Hope this helps.
During the meeting, the IEP team, including you, will discuss your child's academic and functional strengths and needs in great detail. Using information from the discussion, the team will create a written, individualized education program, the IEP. The IEP will include goals for your child and the services and supports needed to help your child reach their goals, make progress in the general curriculum, participate in extracurricular and non-academic activities, and be educated and participate with children without disabilities to the maximum extent possible. Other important factors and timelines will also be addressed and included in the IEP. A set of model IEP forms for teams to use has been created by the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. Since each school district may develop its own IEP documents, don't be surprised if your child's IEP looks different than the model forms. Even so, your child's IEP must include all the required parts in the right order. Let's discuss the different parts of the IEP. The team will review your child's eligibility for special education services by considering all relevant information and assessments. There are 14 categories of eligibility. If your child is eligible for more than one of these categories, the team, including you, will decide which one is primary and then list others. Next is the student profile. Here the team talks about your child's strengths, results of assessments and evaluations, and reviews your child's progress on any current IEP goals. The profile also must include your concerns about your child's education and your vision for their future. The team will consider any upcoming transitions. For example, your child may be moving into kindergarten from preschool, transferring into a new school, or there may be changes in your family's circumstances. If a transition is expected at any time during the 12-month IEP period, you and the other team members will discuss any information that could be used to make the transition a smooth one. If your child is 14 or older, or will turn 14 during the 12 months of the IEP, the team will discuss transition to adulthood issues. This will include selecting a course of study for your child. Once your child turns 16, the team must add post-secondary goals and services to the IEP, including areas such as continued education, employment, and independent living as needed. Special factors that affect your child's education will be included on the IEP form, such as behavior that impedes learning, language or communication needs, and other factors. Once your child's academic and functional needs have been identified, the team will write measurable annual goals that will address those needs. Each goal will specifically describe the skills your child is expected to learn in a particular area over the course of 12 months. Before the team can write an appropriate annual goal, they must have current and specific information about your child's performance in that goal area, including how their disability affects learning. This is called a present level of academic achievement and functional performance and is the foundation for writing a goal. Goals must be clearly written, understandable, and measurable. This means you should be able to visualize the skill or behavior your child will achieve and know when the goal is accomplished. It's very important that you understand the purpose and the function of each goal. If something's not clear, ask to have it explained. For each goal written, the team decides if there are any assistive technology devices or services needed for the child to accomplish the goal. An assistive technology device might be a simple pencil grip, or maybe a computer with a touchscreen. An assistive technology service could include teaching your child or their teacher how to use that device. The team will also identify any related services, such as physical or speech therapy, needed to support your child in reaching their goal. Not all students will need assistive technology or related services. Next, the team will also consider any supports and services, accommodations or modifications your child needs to be successful in general or special education classes, and in other activities such as lunch, recess, field trips, and other school functions. The IEP will be specific about when and where services will be provided. Federal and state laws require that, to the maximum extent possible, students with disabilities must be educated with their non-disabled peers. This is known as the least restrictive environment. The IEP must include a clear explanation for any part of the day that your child will not be participating with non-disabled students, including time in resource or other separate classrooms. Here are some other questions the team will answer. How will your child's progress be measured? How will your child's progress toward achieving their IEP goals be reported to you? Will your child need special education services beyond the typical school year? And finally, the last step is to document the names and roles of the IEP team members who were present and participated in developing the IEP. Once the plan is completed, it must be followed as written for 12 months. If changes are needed to the IEP, they can be made by the IEP team. As you can see, the IEP process is complicated, and there's a lot to think about. But when followed as Congress intended, and the law is written, the process will lead to an appropriate educational program for your child. Now that you know what's included in the IEP, it's time to move on to Chapter 4, Getting Ready for Your Child's IEP Meeting.
All right, I hope you found that video informative, but remember, when it comes to the role of families, IDEA stresses the importance of getting them involved because they are an integral part of the education process. The major goal of the IEP team meeting is to form partnerships between parents, schools, and service professionals that are attempting to instruct the student. Some tools for individualized programming focus on the Individualized Family Services Plan, the Individualized Education Plan, a Statement of Transitional Services, and Behavioral Intervention Plans. All of these are discussed in Chapter 2. I've also put examples of IEPs on Springboard for you to check out if you're interested. When it comes to the Individualized Family Services Plan, for those students who are in early childhood, this is of critical importance. These serve children from birth to age 3, and it also serves their families. These students are evaluated twice a year or every 6 months because of the quick growth and the quick educational change that might take place in such a critical growth period. They're coordinated by a service manager or a case manager, and they include transitional services to get these students moved into preschool. When it comes to these plans, they have to include the child's current level of functioning, what are the family's needs and strengths, you're looking at expected outcomes and timelines of what you want to see happening, the date that services are to start, and methods for getting that student transitioned into preschool. What services are we going to provide? When it comes to the Individualized Education Program, this serves students with disabilities ages 3 to 21 years old. This assures that each program is provided individually and it's evaluated annually or once a year. It needs to meet all of the students' critical needs. And trust me when I say the availability of services does not determine whether they're included on the IEP. That means if a student needs physical therapy, then it must be provided. The school has to figure out a way to pull those services in. Each of these IEPs are going to be determined individually based on the student's needs, and it includes the communication of content to everyone who's going to be providing services to that student. So you might have students in your classroom that are on IEPs, and it's going to be your job to know what that student's going to need in order to succeed in your class. When it comes to the IEP, you can look at the form online. It includes the student's present levels of performance, how we're going to actually serve the student, and if they're not going to be participating in general education, we have to talk about why that is. It basically looking at explaining the least restrictive environment for that student. And we want to know how the student's disability influences his or her participation in general education. What can we do to provide a well-rounded education for this individual? There's also a majority of requirements, a huge amount of requirements when it comes to writing this up. This includes figuring out what the student's going to do after graduation, how the student's progress is going to be measured, and how we're going to inform the parents. Just something you might want to take a look at. You'll get more familiar with this as you get deeper into your educational program. All right, when it comes to educational placements, this is the continuum of services that's discussed in your text. The least restrictive environment is going to be the regular education environment or the regular classroom. And this can take place through the use of inclusion. The next level would be a resource room where the student might go for a period or two during the day to get some additional instruction or tutoring. From there, we're looking at self-contained or special education classes, partially self-contained. It could go all the way to a separate school, a residential setting, or even a hospital setting if needed. Remember, this continuum of services exists because all students are going to have different needs, but we have to justify each one of these that we cross out. If it's not going to be regular education, why is that? If a resource room's not appropriate and we have to do self-contained, why are we doing it? So remember, the concept of least restrictive environment is of paramount importance when it comes to students with special needs. We'll also talk about transition throughout the rest of the semester. When I talk about each of the disability categories and students within those, there's a transition component that's included in the IEP. This is what this focuses on what we're going to do to make sure the student's going to move from high school to adult life with success. And this begins at age 16 around the country. In Ohio, it begins at age 14. We're preparing these students for post-school life. This is my area of expertise. I've worked in this field for over 20 years, and I specialize in training students for jobs or preparing them to come on college campuses and be successful in their classrooms. Other service providers will help students help set goals, gain work experience, and develop the skills needed for independent living. When it comes to Chapter 7, I'll talk more about behavioral intervention plans, but go ahead and review this in your text. Things like manifestation determination and functional behavior assessment and behavior intervention plans. Those would be really good definitions to know when it comes to the first module exam. One thing I definitely want you to know, there are some procedural safeguards in place when it comes to implementing an individualized educational program. Notification about meetings and other important events must be documented in writing. And parents need to understand the meaning of communications from the schools. What this means is we need to communicate with parents on their level. When we're talking with parents at meetings, these need to be in the parent's native language, Wow, big surprise. I bet you didn't see that coming. So just in case you have parents that speak Spanish as their primary language, you better have somebody there to speak Spanish. It's funny how much common sense we need to talk about in education. But also, your discussions with parents need to be free of educational jargon. Even though you're very, very comfortable with the subject matter, the parents might not be. So make sure parents have a good understanding of the message you're sending, and make sure they are as comfortable as possible during this process. We'll also talk about high stakes testing in each of the disability categories. No Child Left Behind and IDEA require all schools participate in the assessment accountability system. Some of our students are going to need accommodations such as extended time or questions read aloud. They might even allow modifications. That would be the use of a calculator or maybe some reduced test questions. For students that cannot participate at that level, we'll talk about students that participate in alternative assessments. And this is for students that are not participating in the general education curriculum. And this could be because of a severe cognitive disability, and this represents approximately 1% of the total school population. So be aware, alternate assessments are a hot topic right now in education. When we start determining factors when it comes to determining the least restrictive environment, we need to look at the students' goals and objectives. Is there a good balance between the least restrictive environment and their free and appropriate public education? What are the desired outcomes for the individual after graduation? And what is the array of special education services that are going to be required for the students to attain their goals? All those are going to be critical factors in the educational planning process. So who can we include when it comes to providing these services? Here's a whole bunch of them. Everything from paraprofessionals to audiologists, and we'll discuss each of their roles as the semester goes on. It's not important for the first module exam that you memorize all of these, but remember some common themes that are going to show up are paraprofessionals, speech and language pathologist, physical therapists, recreational therapists, and we'll talk about all of those. When it comes to progress monitoring, this is where we want to find out our educational effectiveness, and we want to do this on a daily basis to make sure we're not wasting valuable instructional time. This includes the students' improvement in academic skills, improvements in behavior, or any life skills that are needed. Some appropriate assessments I'll discuss right now. I can tell you standardized tests are a big concern for educators because oftentimes they can end up overrepresenting students from culturally or linguistically diverse backgrounds. We'll talk more about that in Chapter 3, and there's a great video attached with Dr. Smolin and Dr. Ford that talks about how we can reduce that overrepresentation. But we want to look at more authentic assessments. That means things that are going on in our classroom, like curriculum-based measurements and portfolio assessments. When we talk about curriculum-based measurements, these are a direct measurement of the individual student's performance on the subject matter you're teaching. We know students have reviewed this information. We know that instruction has been delivered. So we want to do a detailed data collection system. That means we're going to do frequent measurements of our instructional strategies and provide instant information about student performance. Are they getting it, or do we have to provide some remediation? Also, a database intervention that can improve student learning. This is a very, very good approach, and we'll talk more about this in each of the chapters. A final assessment I want to talk about briefly is portfolio assessments. These are very, very creative and intense to put together. They provide actual work samples of the student, and it can include pictures, writing samples, any types of reports. And now I would even say that's not included in your text, but video assessments, being able to show a student completing a skill using videos from your iPhone, iPad, whatever you have. All right, that wraps up Chapter 2. Chapter 3, we're going to get into talking about students from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. Make sure you're keeping up with the reading. And if you have any questions, you can always contact me or my graduate assistant. Hope this is helpful. Class dismissed.
He does enjoy writing. He has an excellent imagination. And by using the Alpha Smart, he's able to take his writing to another level.
In the previous example, you saw how an accommodation was used for a student with a mild disability. In this next demonstration, notice how an accommodation can be used to overcome more severe barriers.
William is a boy who is first grade age. He is diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, which is a form of autism. Autism is a spectrum disorder, and so Asperger's falls towards the more normal range of the autism spectrum. He is on grade level in his reading and in his math, but socially he is not as mature as a lot of the students in the class. All right. There are a lot of barriers within William that keep him from getting the regular curriculum if we don't help him. We teach with a lot of modalities in first grade. We sing, we touch, we bake, we read, we make things, we look at pictures, we look at movies. And for most students, a lot of students wouldn't need that. It's good for them, but they would still learn the material. If we don't do things like that for William, he misses it. Now, what do you clean up after? Some of you might
eating.
Maybe you clean up after you're eating. I was thinking
toys?
your toys. The special day teacher and I share the responsibility of instructional time for William, and we found a lot of solutions to things and are now making it easier for William to be part of the class. And that support is great because there's someone with suggestions to help you.